Βρισκόμαστε στη μέση μιας τεράστιας αλλαγής, για την οποία λίγοι είναι προετοιμασμένοι. Αν σχεδιάσουμε τη ζωή μας σωστά, η αλλαγή αυτή θα είναι ένα δώρο, αν όχι ένα βάρος. Από εδώ και πέρα, όπου και αν ζει κανείς, ό,τι ηλικία και αν έχει, θα ζει περισσότερο, πολύ περισσότερο. Μπορεί να φτάσει τα 100 χρόνια. Η μακροβιότητα θα αλλάξει την κοινωνία, την εργασία, τον τρόπο που ζούμε, που δουλεύουμε, το πόσο και πώς δουλεύουμε, το πώς διασκεδάζουμε, θα αλλάξει ακόμα και τις προσωπικές μας σχέσεις. Ένα παιδί που γεννιέται σήμερα στο δυτικό κόσμο έχει 50% πιθανότητες να ζήσει μέχρι τα 105. Ένας 20χρονος τις ίδιες πιθανότητες να ζήσει 100 χρόνια. Ένας 40χρονος να φτάσει τα 95 χρόνια και ένας 60χρονος τις ίδιες πιθανότητες να ξεπεράσει τα 90. Δύο επιστήμονες και καθηγητές του London Business School, διάσημου Πανεπιστημίου του Λονδίνου, ο οικονομολόγος Andrew Scott και η ψυχολόγος Lynda Gratton, έγραψαν το βιβλίο «100 χρόνια ζωής, ζώντας και δουλεύοντας στα χρόνια της μακροβιότητας», το οποίο έγινε παγκόσμιο best-seller. Ένα βιβλίο που μας προετοιμάζει για αυτό που έχει έρθει, την επιμήκυνση της ζωής και πώς μπορούμε να επιβιώσουμε και να ξανασχεδιάσουμε τη ζωή μας. Συναντήσαμε στο Λονδίνο τους δύο καθηγητές σε μια συζήτηση που ανατρέπει πολλές από τις σταθερές μας μέχρι σήμερα. So, thank you very much for this interview. I want to ask you first, you are a psychologist, you're an economist. How come you decided to co-write this book?
There are so many overlapping issues here, and we began to realize that perhaps one of the reasons the book was so successful is because of that combination of psychology and economics.
No, I think economics and psychology probably should spend a bit more time together, shouldn't they, really? It would be helpful.
So before we go to the specific question, let's give the facts about the current state of the situation in terms of numbers. How long are we going to live?
Well, the younger you are, probably the longer you can expect to live, because life expectancy has been increasing. At the heart of the 100-year life is an extraordinary fact that over the last 150 years, life expectancy has increased 2 or 3 years every decade, which is phenomenal. I always say to people, you know, that's like at the end of every day having another 6 to 8 hours. We've got more time. Now, life expectancy gains are slowing down because basically the young are now so likely to hit 60. The only way we can get further life expectancy gains is from the chances of going to 90 or to 100. And that's still increasing. So if you look at the high-income countries today, I pick the United Kingdom as an example. We're not particularly good at life expectancy, but the typical girl born today can expect to live to 93, 94.
93, 94.
And 1 in 5 of them can expect to live to be 100 according to government data. So certainly the average now is in the low 90s, and you have to prepare for even the possibility of a 100-year life. So that's the other thing, is that very, very few people, and this gets a bit brutal, this conversation, very few people sort of die at the average life expectancy. There's a very big tail above that. So actually, and interesting, most people die above the average life expectancy for sort of different reasons. So yeah,
I could easily make it to 100.
Well, easily may not be the right word, but you've certainly got to prepare.
I could crawl into 100.
I mean, this is that, you know, this is of course why I wrote this book, isn't it? We've got to prepare for not just living through your 80s, but living through your 90s.
Yeah, I think that's the big challenge.
Την πρόκληση αυτή καλούμαστε να αντιμετωπίσουμε όλοι σε όποια ηλικία και αν είμαστε. Είναι όμως διαφορετικό αν από την αρχή της ζωής μας γνωρίζαμε πόσο θα ζήσουμε και όλες οι κοινωνικές και οικονομικές δομές είχαν προσαρμοστεί ανάλογα και άλλο αν όχι. Okay, since you mentioned challenge, when is the biggest challenge that somebody is facing with this new data?
Well, I think it depends how old they are, really. I mean, as Andrew said, if you're young, you're going to live longer. And so the challenge that you face is to how do you construct a working life that allows you to stay productive right into your 70s? And you've got a whole lifetime to do that. if you're in your 50s and suddenly realizing, actually, I don't have enough savings, I've got to carry on working until my 60s or 70s, then that's more difficult because you haven't made the preparation necessarily. And if, like me, you're in your 70s, then the question you're asking is, well, this is what I'm asking anyway. Quite a lot of people in their 80s don't seem very healthy. Yeah. How could I be healthy in my 80s and my 90s? And of course, the thing to remember is that each age cohort reinvents. So the reason I told you my age, which is unusual for a woman, is because I want people to realize, you can reinvent yourself at any age. I don't know what you feel, Andrew, but I think the challenges are different depending on how old you are.
First of all, how do we respond to something that humanity's never had to deal with before? And of course, the older you are, the more you've been going along one path, and you're going to have to switch to a different path. And then, the other challenge is everyone's going to be in very different circumstances. Yeah. People age really differently. That, by the way, is really important because, as Lynda said, the older you get, the more you see diversity in how people age. Not everyone who's 80 is the same. Not everyone who's 30 is the same, but in terms of health and financial needs, there's huge variation.
Yeah.
But what can you do to make sure you're one of the healthier people when you reach 80? And what institutions, what markets and products and social norms are there to enable you to do it? Because this is the imperative. I mean, you are now, for the first time ever, likely to live into your 90s. But we fear getting old. We worry about outliving our health, our wealth, our finances and our relationships. So that means we've got to do something now to ensure we avoid that negative outcome.
Το βιβλίο των δύο καθηγητών ξεκινά με το δεδομένο και κάτι που αρχίζει να γίνεται ήδη πραγματικότητα, ότι τα τρία στάδια ζωής, όπως τα ξέραμε μέχρι τώρα, δηλαδή ότι στην αρχή της ζωής μας μορφωνόμαστε, μετά εργαζόμαστε και μετά παίρνουμε σύνταξη, δεν θα υπάρχουν πια. The thing that you focus on in your book is that the three-stage life does not exist or will not exist anymore. Mm-hmm. So if this work, like education, work, retirement doesn't exist anymore, what kind of stages are we talking now?
Well, it was interesting because when Andrew and I started working together, Andrew is an economist, me as a psychologist, both of us, he from a primarily economic perspective, I from a primarily psychological perspective, had realized that the three-stage life of full-time education, full-time work, full-time retirement wasn't going to work. It doesn't work economically and it doesn't work psychologically. And, and in a way, the difficulty of changing that is that the three stages are rather easy. Everybody is educated at the same time, you will go to work at the same time, you will retire at the same age, and so you don't really have to build your own life, you just have to watch what everybody else is doing and following it. And so what we suggested in the 100-Year Life is that you have to think about your life not as three stages, but as many stages. And that means two things. Firstly, that some of those stages get broken up. So, for example, if you're going to work into your 80s or 90s, you can't just do education just at once. Similarly, in terms of retirement, you can't go without any break and work until your 70s. You've got to take some of that free time from your retirement and slice it back in. So part of it is about slicing both education, work and retirement into smaller segments. But the second thing is you actually have to think about adding new stages. And those new stages are primarily stages that help you make transitions. That give you time off to think like a sabbatical or a time to do something else, maybe time to be a freelancer. So it's not just about doing things differently, it's actually also about doing different things.
My starting point with this is as an economist and what has really happened. So in general, this topic of an aging society is always about there being more old people. But if you think about you or me or whoever's listening here, the real change is we now can expect more time.
More time, yeah.
And the question is, what do you want to do with that time and when do you want to use it? And with more time, we need to redesign life. And we're very used to thinking of time in a very fixed way. Education, work, retirement. But what's interesting is that the way we use time was very much a 20th century invention. So in the 20th century, we invented weekends. They didn't exist beforehand. We invented teenagers. You used to go from being a child to being an adult at about 12 or 14. We invented teenagers. We invented retirement. We said at the end of your life, you'll get money and you'll be financially independent. And having sort of invented teenagers and invented retirement, we then invented the middle age. We sort of said, 1965, we invented the middle age crisis. So all these sort of things that we think are fixed are relatively recent. Now, the problem we've got is as we're living for longer, what's been happening is we've just been taking more and more time after retirement. And that's nice, but actually, is that the best place to have that time? Might you want some time at the beginning of your life? So just as we made adults, 12 and 14 used to be an adult, then it was 18, perhaps now we're seeing the concept of emerging adulthood, where my children take on those adult responsibilities of marriage, children, careers later in life. Perhaps if you have a midlife crisis, you want to spend some time to make use and say, well, actually, I'm unhappy. How do I change and do something different? Perhaps you will need to care for elderly parents. And so how do I use that time now to ease the pressures I've got? And that's, I think, the starting point. We cannot just continue to say, all we have to do is raise the retirement age, because that finances a long life. It doesn't make a good life. So how can we think about the life course in a more radical way, both socially but also personally?
Σε κανέναν δεν αρέσει να μεγαλώνει και ίσως με τη νέα πραγματικότητα της επιμήκυσης της ζωής να δούμε και την ηλικία μας διαφορετικά. Εξάλλου δεν συνηθίζουμε να λέμε πως η ηλικία είναι απλά ένας αριθμός. Ίσως, αντί να είμαστε ηλικιωμένοι για μεγάλο διάστημα, να θεωρούμαστε νέοι για μεγάλο διάστημα.
And the other thing you mentioned in your book is that in this scenario, age is not a stage anymore. What does that actually mean in terms of how we live our life?
When we thought about age being a stage, it really goes back to the three-stage life, which is to say, in a three-stage life, you didn't need to know what stage somebody was at in their life. You simply needed to know their age. And if you knew their age, you knew their stage. So if they were, 17 or 18, they were in education. If they were 40, they were working. If they were 60, they were retired. But actually what we're talking about is that, you could be 40 and in education. You could be 50 and going on a gap year and taking a year off. So nowadays, when you look at someone's age, you can't predict what their stage is.
And I think that's a very big challenge, because we therefore are missing the needs of groups at different ages. Lynda talked about education at 50. Let's imagine that, AI perhaps is going to come along and you're going to lose your job because of AI. You're going to need to train to do something else. You can't retire at 50. If you're a construction worker, it's going to be really hard to keep on working beyond 50. You need a new set of skills. And so you might go back to college and you're going to be sitting alongside a whole range of people from different ages. But age no longer means stage. It could be at 21, you say, I'm keen to start working full time. It could be you say, I want to spend some time traveling. And then, of course, in 20 years' time, the person who's working hard says, I need a break. The person who took time out early says, I've got to keep on working. So you really won't be able to look at age and say, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Ωραία όλα αυτά με την ηλικία, τις προσωπικές επιλογές και τα διαλύματα στην εργασία. Όμως, πώς θα τα στηρίξουμε όλα αυτά οικονομικά? Και εδώ μπαίνουμε στην ουσία του προβλήματος και στις αλλαγές στον εργασιακό χώρο.
The question here is, how are you going to finance this new life? And this is key in order to take time off, in order to educate yourself.
So this is where, so I think the great thing about this story of living a longer life and having more time is it's exciting, there's opportunities, but it comes at a cost. And I think that's one of the really big problems we've got at the moment in society, whether it be Greek society or anywhere. We're living for longer, and if you're living for longer, you need more resources unless you can see a fall in your standard of living. Saving doesn't help, because saving just shifts when you get your money. It doesn't give you more money. So if you're living longer, you need more money over your lifetime. And that's got to come from somewhere. And that means people have to work for longer. Now, it doesn't mean that they have to just keep going in the same way. It could be that, for instance, you say, well, I'm going to take mid-career break and I'll work 2 years longer at the end. It could be that you say, I've done my full-time work, I'm now going to switch to part-time work. So rather than work full-time to the retirement age and then stop, you might start to work part-time at 60 and work part-time to your 70. But we need to work for longer to pay for a longer life. And unless something comes along like AI and suddenly makes us all more productive so we can get more money by working less, we have to work for longer, unless you want to take a lower standard of living. Most people don't, so there's this reality. We have to work more, but I don't think we have to work in the same way. That's the key thing.
And I think, you know, this story about you have to work for longer, I think part of the reason that our book, The 100-Year Life, was so important in so many countries, it was translated into so many languages, is because governments don't tell you the story of that. You know, nobody is going to become a prime minister and say, good news, guess what? I'm going to say to you that you now need to work until you're 70. This is not an electable pledge. So no governments do that. No prime minister does it. They all try and push away from the fact that if you live longer, you have to work longer. And I think people appreciated that we're academics. We're not, nobody votes us in. We've both got tenure. We can stay as long as we want.
And say whatever you want.
Say whatever we want, and we can say the truth. And this is the simple truth. Whatever governments tell you, the simple truth is that you have to prepare to work for longer. And that means that you have to build your skills across a long, life. I think it's great news, actually, because frankly, work is good. Now, of course, there is some work which is dreadful and horrible, but for most people, engaging in work means that they spend time with different people. It means they build their skills. And of course, they earn some money, which is a good thing. So we shouldn't be frightened of working for longer. But we should also ask ourselves, what sort of work do I want to do?
Οι καθηγητές θεωρούν ότι από πολύ νωρίς κανείς στη ζωή του καλείται πια να αποφασίζει για την καριέρα και την εργασία του με το σκεπτικό πως πρέπει να χρηματοδοτήσει μια μεγάλη ζωή. Κάτι που δεν είναι εύκολο να γίνει σε όλες τις δουλειές, ιδιαίτερα όχι στις χειρονακτικές, και δεν έχουν όλοι το προνόμιο να μπορούν να σχεδιάζουν και να παίρνουν χρόνο να σκεφτούν. Οι νέες γενιές δεν θα έχουν μια καριέρα, αλλά περισσότερες, και όλοι θα επιμορφώνονται πολλές φορές στη ζωή τους. Η διαβίου μάθηση θα είναι προϋπόθεση επιβίωσης. Θα υπάρχει μερική απασχόληση και μεικτά μοντέλα εργασίας. Αλλά και πρέπει να βρεθεί τρόπος οι πενηντάριδες να προσθέτουν παραγωγικά χρόνια στην εργασία τους και οι επιχειρήσεις να τους κρατάνε.
I think also the other thing that where this gets confused is twofold. The first is there's this notion that it's only about raising the retirement age. But actually, if you look at the data, people start to leave the labour market age 50.
Yeah, age 50.
And so, most people think, I'm fine, I'll keep going till 65. But actually, a lot of people lose their job in their 50s. And they do that for a number of reasons. One is it may be their skills are out of date. It may be they get ill. They've got to care for someone who's ill. Or there's just ageism in the workplace, that older workers tend to be the first to lose their job. And then it's really hard, as an older worker, to get another job. So I think an awful lot can be done to help people work from 50 up to 65, 66. That's a really important thing, and governments aren't spending enough attention on this. My data says that all of the employment growth in Europe over the last 10 years has come from workers aged over 50. There's more of them, and also they're more likely to work.
And find work after 60?
They carry on working. They don't find work, they carry on working. So actually, that means that across Europe, because there's no productivity growth, GDP growth is dependent upon keeping people in work from 50 onwards. Then the second problem is, I think that the politicians, they know that they don't want to try and not say, oh, you're going to have to work for longer. But when they do, I don't think they do it in a very smart way. They just say, I'm going to raise the retirement age. And if that's the only thing they do, it solves a pension problem. The government doesn't spend so much money on pension, but it does nothing to help me work for longer. Because if this health system is not keeping me healthy, if I haven't got a way of updating my skills, if firms are biased against older workers, all you're doing is saying, you've got to work for longer, you probably won't, but I've saved money on pensions. And that's a really big problem. The other big problem is that this is complicated because not everyone ages in the same way. We're university professors. We can carry on working for a long time. So if you're a construction worker, you can't. So you've really got to think about this. And this goes back to the heart of this problem. The notion that age alone is enough to determine what everyone needs is way too simplistic. We have to have a much more nuanced system that helps those who can't work for longer, but also provides incentives for those who can. And that's a much more complicated one.
Στην Ελλάδα, τα όρια συνταξιοδότησης θα επαναπροσδιορίζονται από το 2027 κάθε 3 χρόνια, με βάση το προσδόκιμο ζωής των ασφαλισμένων. Η θεσμοθετημένη ηλικία συνταξιοδότησης είναι σήμερα τα 62 έτη με 40 χρόνια ασφάλισης και τα 67 έτη με 15 χρόνια ασφάλισης.
And what would you say to all these people who are waiting to have their pension after 62 or 65? We saw even in France that there were riots 2 years ago because of this pension bill.
Well, if you're 62, you shouldn't be, and you're expecting to retire at 65, you cannot be suddenly told you've got to. You need to fade these things in. So I think that's absolutely fair to be upset about that. I think the bigger challenge is you have to. The younger you are, the more you're going to realise you're going to have to live a different life from those who are older. And so how do you position yourself? So even if there is still a pension, it's likely to be less generous. And so you're probably going to want to have extra money. It may be also you enjoy work and you like a sense of engagement. But you're going to have to think about what are the skills I've got, what are the jobs I've got that I can do in what I call age-friendly jobs. Jobs that are more flexible in terms of their hours. They give you more autonomy and they're less physically demanding. I think for many people, you don't want work to go from full-time to nothing. You want a more gradual process of going from working full-time to then doing nothing. And that's, I think, how do you think about where are those jobs?
Και η ευθύνη του επανασχεδιασμού της ζωής μας πέφτει αρκετά πάνω μας, όπως εξηγούν οι δύο καθηγητές. Καλούμαστε να φανταστούμε τα διάφορα στάδια της ζωής μας, να σχεδιάσουμε το μέλλον μας και να είμαστε ανοιχτοί σε αλλαγές.
Because our institutions don't yet support the length of life you need to expect, you're going to have to solve the problem yourself. You know, at 60, I have to behave differently from my father and my grandfather at 60 because I've got more years ahead. But institutions are slow to change, so we have to look up and find solutions, which is hard.
Αλλά και οι εταιρείες και οι επιχειρήσεις, σύμφωνα με τους καθηγητές, πρέπει να κατανοήσουν ότι θα αλλάξει η εργασία και ο παραγωγικός βίος του κάθε ανθρώπου.
How is work going to change in terms of businesses, corporations, and all smaller kind of businesses?
Well, work is changing all the time, and it's changing in all sorts of dimensions. One is, obviously, technology is changing work. More tasks become automated. You don't have to do it yourself, a machine or AI does it for you. At the same time, the place that we work is changing. The pandemic had a huge impact on working practices, enormous impact. And one of the impacts was that people started to work from home. They realised that actually working from home was still productive. And so right across the world, although in some cases people are going back to the office, there's more flexibility about when you work and where you work. So those two trends actually play in very well to older people because, well, you know, older people want more flexibility. As it turns out, in fact, the people who want the most flexibility are the ones with kids. It's actually people with young children who want the most flexibility, not people in their 60s and 70s. But nevertheless, what we're seeing is companies are being more thoughtful about flexibility, about hours of work, about allowing people to, you know, to come and maybe do three days. The third thing that's changing work, which I think will be very important for older workers, is the building up of the freelance industry. But what we're discovering is that many, you know, highly skilled jobs can now be done as a freelancer. And that gives you a lot more potential to work around how you want to work. You know, you can maybe just work on a project and then take time off.
Σε όλα αυτά έρχεται να προσθεθεί και η δημογραφική πίεση. Η γύραση του πληθυσμού και ιδιαίτερα στην Ελλάδα, που σε μερικές δεκαετίες θα έχει τον πιο γερασμένο πληθυσμό της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης, και οι περιορισμένες γεννήσεις θα αλλάξουν την αγορά εργασίας και τα ηλικιακά στερεότυπα και ίσως οδηγήσουν σε επαναπροσέλκυση συνταξιούχων.
All companies are going to have to face is the fall in the birth rate. We're seeing fewer and fewer younger people. And so this aging society is that when the birth rate was high, that generation are now living longer, and coming behind them is a much smaller generation. There just aren't so many younger workers. And in some countries, you're just seeing the population decline, but everywhere you're seeing fewer younger workers.
Πέρα όμως από την εργασία, η μακροβιότητα θα αλλάξει και όσα ξέραμε για τις σχέσεις. Από εδώ και πέρα, να είμαστε προετοιμασμένοι να δούμε πολλές διαφορετικού τύπου σχέσεις, πολλές διαφορετικές επιλογές ζωής.
So what about the institution of marriage? What about the people getting married younger or later? How that will be affected by longevity?
Well, one thing that we're already seeing is that as people know or believe that they're going to live longer, the adult decisions they make about, you know, finding the person they want to be with, about having their first child, is, you know, moving from their 20s to their 30s. And that's happening in most countries of the world, that people are now having their first child in their 30s. And I think one of the reasons, therefore, we're having fewer children is if you have your first child in your 30s, that doesn't give you, as a woman, very much time to have more than 2 kids. So that's been very profound, actually. And of course, the second thing that's been profound, and it comes out in many aspects of long lives, is that if you think you're only going to live to 70, then you start, in a way, winding down in your own mind. Probably, I don't know, maybe from the 50s, 60s onward. And one of the wind downs is, I'm in a lousy marriage. I don't like my spouse at all, but, you know, it's not worth making the decision. It's not worth doing anything differently. But if you think you're going to live healthily into your 90s, you're more likely to say, I want to start again. So we are seeing older, you know, more divorces of people in their 60s and more marriages in their 60s. So people are reinventing themselves, both in terms of their relationships and in terms of their families.
If you think about, you know, there's lots of reasons why people are getting married later. Some of them are negative. You can't afford your own house and you know, work is insecure. But I do think there is this sense of, I'm going to spend longer finding out who I am, defining myself as an adult. And if you know yourself better, I suspect relationships are easier. There's 3 very key concepts of age. One is what it says on your birth certificate. And the older I get, the less convinced I am that's very important. The second is biological age, which is how are you aging, how fit and healthy are you? And the third is how long can you expect to live? You know, I said at 60 I'm different from my father. And in some sense I'm younger than my father because I have more years ahead of me. And that changes your attitude. You've got to be more forward-looking. And I think as an economist, we look at options. And when do you commit and when do you keep options open? And the more time you've got ahead of you, the more valuable options are. I think that's another really important part of this longer life. However old you are, you've got to try and think, well, what if that happened? Let me keep that option open.
You talk about having different lifestyles from now on.
We're already beginning to see those emerging. So, for example, there was a time when being single, certainly a single woman, was you know, people felt sorry for this poor single woman. But now, you know, being single seems to be a perfectly reasonable process for many people. Similarly, deciding not to have children or not having children was seen as something that was abnormal and people felt sorry for you. But now people are making that choice not to have children. And so what we're seeing really is more variety about how you live. So not that necessarily you'll do lots of different things in your own life, but as you look around your friends, you'll see that they're different from you. Let me give you an example for myself. I just came back from Tokyo, where I took 67 students. We have something called the Global Experience at London Business School. I've signed up to that for the next 30 years. I've said to the school, I will run that for the next 30 years. And they said, that's marvellous, because it means you will be teaching the 100-year life when you're 100. And I said, yeah, count me in. So it's a sort of joke, really, but that's a future self that I could walk towards, to say, I would like to be that person who could still take MBA students to Tokyo at the age of 80, or maybe even the age of 90.
There's a risk of making it all sound too big and too complicated, but it is a very big change we're going through. Yeah. And in relationships, I think, there's two ways in relationships will shift. One is the family, and one, as Lynda said, is about yourself. So family is going to get more complicated. When I was growing up in London, I was one of seemingly dozens and dozens of cousins. There were lots and lots of aunts and uncles, and there was just a couple of grandparents. And the cousins dominated what was happening. Now, with this sort of more vertical structure, those intergenerational relationships are going to get more complicated. But also, how do you deal with having a step-grandfather? What's your responsibility to a step-grandfather when perhaps your mother passes? And there's so many little things that need to be worked out here. And then I think the second thing that is because you can't rely upon the big family to do it. There'd be many more intense but cross-generational relationships. And I'm not sure, Greece may be better than the UK, but I'm not sure how well thought through those things are. And they're certainly going to be different.
Η λέξη κλειδί θα είναι η επανεφεύρεση του εαυτού μας.
The second thing is, I think, is kind of your relationship with yourself. And I do think, we talked about why people are having fewer children. What is it about this multi-stage life that makes it your life? As you change and grow and go through transitions, what are the values, if any, that are constant through it? And I think that creates, strangely, a sense of self, because, if you've got one role and one job, you can identify with that very clearly. But if your life's going to go through different jobs and different roles and different relationships, what is the thread that pulls it together? And I do think we see, certainly amongst younger generations, a greater sense of focus on identity and of value. When life was short, I think society spent a lot of time thinking about the afterlife and preparing for it. As life gets longer, I think we're spending a lot more time on how do I prepare for this longer life, and it's about me. So that's quite a profound change with your own relationship.
Yeah, but I'd like to add to that one of the research findings that's coming out in a rather profound way is the role of friendship. So, for example, we now know that if you look at somebody over their whole life, and you look at those that have had lives that they believe to be satisfying and fulfilling, and those who didn't, one of the major differences is their friendships, particularly friendships that last. And when I look at Greek society and the role of the family and the role of the community and the role of friendships, these are really, really important to aging. And you perhaps know that the research that has been done on areas where people live longer, there's a whole bunch of reasons why they live longer, but one is that they are part of a family and they have friends. And of course, if you're going to live to 90, then you have to have friends of different ages, because so many 80-year-olds say to me, I have no friends now because all my friends have died. You have to, as Andrew said, you have to reach down into different generations. And part of the reason I carry on working is because I have friends who are younger than me. And they really appreciate having me as a friend because I'm older and sometimes wiser, and I appreciate having them as a friend. Because, you know, having a friend who's 40, as I have, is not the same as having a child who's 40, as I have. I have a stepdaughter who's 40, and I have friends who are also 40. It's not the same. You know, the relationship with your children is not the same as relationships with friends. So actually, friendships are very important. And one of the things I think we have to consider as we age is how do I keep my friends and how do I continue to make new friends.
Υπάρχει όμως κάτι που όσο αυξάνεται το προσδόκιμο ζωής, εκείνο μένει σταθερό.
And since you talk a lot about children, the one thing that does not change is the age when a woman can conceive.
Yes.
So how are we going to deal with that?
Well, that's a very profound question. The astonishing thing is that every part of our body, in a sense, has become, you know, aged-proof. We can age longer, but the part that hasn't is our, you know, having a child. I mean, women struggle to have children into their late 30s and into their 40s, and that puts, I think, an enormous pressure on them and on their partner and on work, really.
If I look at the data, in general, I would say that people want to have children later, but that doesn't have a big effect on how many children they want. People now just want fewer children, but it'll have some effect. But of course, this is where we get into the realms of how do we age better. And one way to age better is, of course, to exercise more and eat vegetables and all that sort of stuff. But there's a lot of science out there which is coming along and says we're going to change biologically how you age. And some of that science is saying, well, why do women have the menopause? Humans are quite unusual amongst animals in experiencing a menopause. Can we do something about it? Now, whether that's a good or a bad thing, I'm not going to comment on, but I think is a really radical way of thinking about how science may create whole new opportunities, which is pretty profound.
So after researching so much about the book and talking about it for so many years, do you believe it's a curse or a gift to live for longer?
A total gift. An absolute gift, and it's an astonishing thing. But, you know, both of us had parents who died relatively young. I mean, it still breaks my heart to think of the years my father could have lived and didn't. And I feel, you know, profoundly grateful for the fact that I'm 70, I'm still in good health. There's no reason, as Andrew's told me, that I shouldn't be able to get through to 93. Yeah, it's a huge gift. It's an astonishing gift.
I think it is. I mean, I think a long life is something that many people in history would have wanted and didn't get. So we are blessed to have it as an opportunity. It is daunting. I think that's the important thing. I think what I love about the title, The 100-Year Life, is it just makes people go, oh, you know, it's like, I can see why it's good. Oh, goodness. Yeah. It's a daunting challenge. Because what worries me a little bit at the moment, we have health systems that are getting better and better at keeping us alive. But as life expectancy goes to the 90s and beyond, we're not healthier for longer. And I think it's way more important, rather than just keep on increasing life expectancy, to stop and say, actually, we're increasing life expectancy, but we've got some problems. There's a caring problem, there's a dementia problem. We've got to keep people healthier for longer, and we've got to keep them in work in a good way for longer. And I think some of society's anger about raising the retirement age is actually understandable, which is, well, it's not working.
Yeah.
The system is not working right now, and it's not going to be better just by making me do this for longer, because I will have to care for older people if we're not healthier when we're longer. What job am I going to be able to do that I'm going to enjoy? And I think then we can solve the problem that Lynda mentioned of politicians not really wanting to talk about this. Because if you say, you know what, this is great, but we've got to change to make sure we get the opportunity.
Η περάταση της ζωής φέρνει ουσιαστικές αλλαγές και με δεδομένο ότι θα αναγκαστούμε να προσθέσουμε χρόνια στο παραγωγικό μας βίο και ότι η διαβίου μάθηση θα είναι προϋπόθεση επιβίωσης στην αγορά εργασίας, ο ελεύθερος μας χρόνος θεωρούν ότι θα περιοριστεί, διότι θα πρέπει να αφιερώνεται και στη μάθηση.
The short leisure time we have to use it in order to be re-educated or redesigning our life.
I agree. I do think part of our leisure, we call it, there's a recreation industry, and in one of the books we call it a recreation industry, because you will have to spend some of your leisure time learning new skills or exploring or adopting new things.
But I think that's a marvellous thing, because I think that's curiosity. And being curious about the world and wanting to learn about the world, you can do that in your leisure time.
Ο Άντριου Σκοτ, που ως οικονομολόγος δίνει διαλέξεις και συμβουλεύει υπουργούς, θεωρεί ότι οι κυβερνήσεις πρέπει να αναλάβουν την ευθύνη για αυτό που έρχεται. Δεν είναι απλά λύση να αυξάνεις τα όρια συνταξιοδότησης, αλλά να βρεις λύσεις να εργάζεται ο κόσμος πιο ευέλικτα σε μεικτά σχήματα απασχόλησης και μερικής συνταξιοδότησης. Και βέβαια, αν είναι να εργάζεται ο κόσμος περισσότερο, πρέπει να είναι υγιής. Έτσι σημαντικό βάρος πέφτει στο σύστημα υγείας κάθε χώρας.
Well, for me, I think for governments there's two key things. And the first is we need to create a health system that's focused on health, not disease. Right now, our health system says, when you're ill, come and see me, and I'll do something about it. As we live to 70, 80, and 90, that's a recipe for disaster. We have to shift towards prevention. The second thing, and I try this with ministries of finance, rather than say, keep raising the retirement age, say, well, how can you keep people working from 50 to the retirement age?
Η Lynda Scott ως ψυχολόγος εστιάζει στο πώς πρέπει να ανακαλύψουμε και να επανεφεύρουμε τον εαυτό μας μέσα στον κόσμο. Ποιος είμαι και πώς θέλω να ζω θα είναι ερωτήματα από τα οποία δεν θα μπορούμε να ξεφύγουμε. Να κάνουμε αλλαγές με θάρρος και ενέργεια.
We can be adventurous at any stage in our life. We can be curious at any stage of our lives. So really opening up. I think humans are very curious people, and usually it's bureaucracy and government that make us, just open out. I mean, there's so much to see in the world, so many things to explore. And one can do that at any age. I've certainly really asked my kids to be explorers, and I would always ask my students and friends to do the same. Just be curious, just look around the world and just explore the world that you're in.
One of my favourite statistics, and it's a UK one, but I think it will be close to the same in Greece, is the average citizen has never been so old, but never had so long left to live. And I think that's a lovely way of looking at the problem, because, we're older than we used to be. I think that's good. More people are living longer. Yeah. But wow, we've got more time ahead of us. And that's got to be where the curiosity comes in. Because, if you're 65 and you tend to die at 70, it's not much point being open-ended and thinking about doing new things. But if you're 65 and you're going to be living to your 90, wow, that's a lot of time. And you've got to be curious, or else that time, I think, will sit very heavily on you, and it may not be a good time.
Το προσδόκιμο ζωής αυξάνεται σταδιακά, όχι απότομα, και αυτό μας προσφέρει χρόνο να σκεφτούμε. Το θέμα όμως είναι ότι είτε μας αρέσουν αυτά που υποστηρίζουν οι δύο καθηγητές, είτε συμφωνούμε ή όχι, ένα είναι το δεδομένο. Η μακροβιότητα είναι γεγονός, είτε το θέλουμε ή όχι. Είτε το θεωρούμε ευκαιρία ή βάρος.
But a person who is burned out and is only imagining or dreaming of their retirement age when they will go to a house by the sea and retire, what would you say to that person who is tired from life?
When I first started teaching this, I'm sure it's the same for Lynda, I would say to people, here's the data, you're going to be living for longer, and you're probably going to have to be working for longer. And there was always a response from people in their 50s, which is like, that's terrible news. And you think, hold on, I've told you you're going to be living for longer, and you think that's bad news. Now, it's really hard, of course, to adapt and adjust, particularly if it's something you've always wanted to do and you don't have much time. But it is like, okay, the world has changed, and actually that is no longer feasible. And that's a brutal thing to know, but is there a way I can still do it? But perhaps I can stop my current job, do something more part-time for 5 or 6 years, and transition into that.
That's where flexible work is so important. I mean, flexible, if let's say you go down to 3 days a week, well, you can spend time at your beach because you've got a longer weekend. So one of the points that Andrew made earlier is that this brutal break between full-time work and full-time retirement is very, very hard. I mean, we know that people really suffer from that. Suddenly, from working really hard to not working at all, that's a very unhealthy transition. And in fact, we know that people get ill in that transition. They find it difficult. So really thinking about how you can move from full-time work to something that's more flexible is a very wise thing to be doing. And the sooner you can start bringing in this notion of options, because options aren't just about, who should I marry? They're also about what sort of job should I have? And what we're beginning to see is that people are building portfolio lives, working lives, where they do different things. They might have do something on the side, a business on the side. They might have a full-time job. They might be taking time off. And the more options that you build into your working life, the more resilience you have, because you don't know whether any one of those options are going to work or not.
I do want to come back to governments as well, because, as we've said, society is not yet ready for this change. And so governments can't just suddenly say, right, next year it's all changed. Because if you haven't got the opportunities to change, that's terrible. So you've got to have a transition. So governments should make changes as far ahead as possible, but also create an environment to help people navigate through. I think this is where starting an honest and open dialogue is going to be really important, because we cannot afford the length of life we've now got on our current situation. So something has to change. But we've got to do it in a way that actually works for society as a whole, and some people will find it easier to adapt and others won't. But it's got to be a national dialogue.
Do you think that the Greek audience, after watching this show, they're going to be happy, oh, yay, we're going to live for longer, or depressed and anxious about that?
I think everyone has a very different reaction to it. I think the more depressed you are, the more you have to understand that this is likely to happen. So you have to do something about it. I think that's the key thing. We just want to raise awareness that the old ways no longer work, and we have to adapt and adjust. And the more people are aware of that, the better. It may be hard news for some and exciting for others, but we all need to plan for that longer future.
And I think one of the ways that Greek society can change around that is just the stereotyping of what people at different ages should be doing. And, if you stereotype, well, this is what a 60-year-old should be doing, or this is what a 70-year-old or an 80-year-old, it really constrains them. So just letting go of what it is to be 50 or 60 or 70, that itself provides opportunities for people to sort of explore more.
Η μακροβιότητα μας χαρίζει χρόνο. Το θέμα είναι τι κάνουμε με αυτόν τον χρόνο.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was really interesting.
So are you excited or are you daunted by it?
I'm definitely excited.
Ο χρόνος είναι παιδί, κλωτσάει μια μπάλα και τρέχει από πίσω της. Αν μια στιγμή κουραστεί, βρίσκει μια ηλιά και κοιμάται στον ίσκιο της. Είναι, σου λέω, παιδί, κρυφό κοιτάει της ψυχής σου τα νύποτα, ερωτευμένο παιδί. Ο χρόνος είναι